My manager was secretly logging into my computer after hours to read my private search history. He thought he was being clever, hiding behind a cloak of corporate authority and a remote connection thousands of miles away. He thought he was invisible, a ghost in my machine, entitled to sift through my private life, my hopes, my fears, my completely mundane questions for the internet, all under the guise of protecting company assets. What he didn't know was that his secret was already out. And he definitely didn't know I was about to use his own snooping to spring a trap he'd never see coming. He wanted to read my story? Fine. I was about to write him a bestseller. It all started in a place that was deceptively normal. I worked for a mid-sized marketing firm called Momentum Media. On the surface, it was a pretty decent place to be. The pay was fine, the coffee was always lukewarm, and my colleagues were the best part of the job. We were a tight-knit team that had mastered the art of communicating through sarcastic memes in our group chat. We were good at our jobs, we hit our targets, and we genuinely enjoyed the collaborative chaos. I was a data analyst. My job was to live in spreadsheets, find the stories hidden in the numbers, and build the models that predicted our clients' success. I was good at it. I was the quiet one, headphones on, the one you could count on to pull an all-nighter to get a project done. I didn't play office politics. I just delivered. And for a long time, that was enough. Our direct supervisor was a man named Mark. Mark was fine. He was the very picture of a middle manager, a human forwarding service for emails from the top. He cared more about the formatting on a PowerPoint slide than the data it contained. But he was mostly harmless. The real power, the source of all office anxiety, was Mr. Henderson. The CEO, the legend, the ghost. Mr. Henderson hadn't physically been in our office for at least 3 years. He ran his empire from a home office in a different time zone, a disembodied voice on conference calls, and a cryptic signature on company-wide emails. His management style was a bizarre mix of total detachment and obsessive micromanagement. We'd hear nothing for months, and then a furious email would land in Mark's inbox because someone used the wrong shade of blue in a proposal. Then came the meeting that changed everything. Mark called us into the conference room, looking visibly sweaty and avoiding eye contact. He cleared his throat and started reading from a piece of paper, his hands trembling. As you know, he began, Mr. Henderson is deeply committed to optimizing productivity and ensuring the security of our data. A few of us exchanged glances. This was the standard opening for some new inconvenient policy. To that end, Mark continued, we will be implementing new software to monitor workplace efficiency. This means that computer usage will be logged to ensure that company resources are being used for professional purposes only. A tense silence filled the room. This felt different, more invasive. Someone asked what logged even meant. Mark just shrugged, offering vague non-answers. It's just standard procedure, he mumbled, a security measure. At the time, I figured it was probably legal, even if it felt wrong. My initial research seemed to suggest the Electronic Communications Privacy Act, ECPA, gives employers a lot of freedom on company-owned devices. But what I didn't realize then was how much that depended on company policy, and more importantly, on state law. This wasn't about productivity, it was about control. It was a digital leash, and we all left that meeting with a new layer of tension coating the office air. A few weeks went by in this new paranoid reality. We all just assumed the monitoring was some automated program impersonal and easy enough to avoid by just using our phones for anything personal. We were wrong, so wrong. The truth came out on a Tuesday night. I was working late on a quarterly report, and the office was dead silent. Around 8:30 p.m., I got up to stretch. I was gone for maybe 3 minutes. When I came back, I stopped cold. My mouse cursor, which ID left sitting still, was now drifting slowly across the screen. My blood ran cold. I didn't move, didn't breathe. It has to be a glitch, I told myself. But then, it moved with purpose. It navigated to the Start menu, hesitated, and then clicked open my Downloads folder. It scrolled through the files, then closed the window. Someone was on my computer. Right now. Live. My heart was hammering. This wasn't an algorithm, it was a person. My mind flashed back to Marcus' announcement. This was the monitoring. It wasn't a program, it was a person, manually logging into my machine. I quietly sat down, pretending I saw nothing. I moved the mouse myself, closed the report as if I were done for the night, and walked out with a calmness I didn't feel. Who was it? It had to be Henderson. This had his brand of paranoid overreach written all over it. That night, I didn't sleep. I researched remote desktop software, corporate surveillance, and how to detect unauthorized access. The next day, I went into the office on a mission. During my lunch break, I started digging. It took almost an hour, but I found it. A record of every remote connection in the system logs. There it was, a login from the same IP address every single weekday evening between 8 and 9:15 p.m. I cross-referenced the IP with an old email from years ago when I had to help Henderson with a secure file transfer. It was a match. It was him. But the discovery that turned my fear into ice-cold fury was what he was looking at. He wasn't checking my work. He was opening one file and one file only. The local cache file for my web browser. The database that stored my entire browsing history. Every search, every article. My searches for gift ideas for my sister. The time I spent reading about symptoms for a minor. Health scare. The forums I visited for advice on my student loans. He was reading my diary. This is when the switch flipped. I did more research, this time focusing on California, where our company was incorporated. It turns out I was wrong about him being in the clear. California has a constitutional right to privacy, and employers can't just secretly spy on you. They generally have to give you written notice before deploying monitoring software. And even then, it's supposed to be limited to work-related stuff. Secretly reading my personal search history wasn't just unethical, it was very likely illegal. I wasn't scared anymore. I was angry. And I felt a cold, methodical purpose settle over me. Going to HR was pointless since they reported to him. And while I could have filed a complaint with the state's labor commissioner, that felt too slow, too impersonal. He had used my own computer as his weapon against me. It was only fitting I use it as my weapon against him. He loves secrets? Fine. I would give him a story so compelling he wouldn't be able to look away. My plan had to be flawless. I couldn't just delete my history, that would show my hand. The history had to look natural. It had to tell a story, a believable narrative that would lead him down a path of his own making. My revenge wouldn't be a loud explosion. It would be a quiet maze with his own paranoia as the monster at its center. Phase 1. Sowing the seeds of doubt. For the first week, my searches became all about dissatisfaction. I had to make him believe his best analyst was about to leave. My search history, which he'd review that evening, started to look like this. Average data analyst salary San Francisco. Highest paying tech companies 2025. Google versus Meta employee benefits. How to transfer 401k to new employer. LinkedIn profile optimization for recruiters. I could almost picture him miles away, a frown forming as he realized his snooping might cost him a key employee. He was listening at the door and hearing things that made him nervous. Perfect. Phase 2. The legal escalation. Once I was a flight risk, it was time to change the narrative. The story wasn't just that I wanted to leave. It was that I might be leaving for a very specific, and for him, very uncomfortable reason. My searches pivoted from job hunting to the very thing he was doing. Is it legal for my boss to read my browser history? Workplace Privacy Laws California. Electronic Communications Privacy Act employer loophole. What constitutes hostile work environment secret surveillance? Can I sue my employer for invasion of privacy California? I was no longer just an employee looking for a new job. I was now an employee arming herself with legal knowledge. I imagined his nightly ritual changing from smug satisfaction to a knot of anxiety. Does she know? What does she know? His spying was feeding him information that was, in turn, making him more paranoid. Phase 3. The secret. Weapon. This was the heart of the trap. I needed to pivot from his fear of a lawsuit to a far greater fear, being exposed for something much worse. I had to invent a corporate scandal. I remembered a story about how our company had mysteriously lost its biggest client, Innovate Corp, a few years back. It was the perfect ghost to resurrect. My search history took a dark turn. SEC whistleblower program information, how to anonymously report corporate financial fraud, wire fraud federal sentencing guidelines. Then I made it personal. Mark Henderson Innovate Corp contract kickbacks. Henderson Innovate Corp SEC investigation. I was creating a fictional crime and putting him at the center. To make it tangible, I created a password-protected zip file on my desktop named hendersoninnovateevidence.zip. The bait had to be irresistible. His paranoia would do the rest. He would have to know what was inside. The password? I left it on a digital sticky note titled Reminders. It was Phoenix 2019, the internal code name for the Innovate Corp account, a detail only an insider would know. Of course, the zip file just contained a single text file named gotcha, TAG-EXT. But he wouldn't know that. Phase 4, the final push. This was the end game. I needed to create a sense of extreme urgency, to convince him that his time was up. That morning, my searches were clinical and specific. Contact information for Sarah Jensen, Wall Street Journal. I picked a real investigative journalist. Top law firm specializing in corporate whistleblower representation. Then, the master stroke. I took a screenshot of a fake email draft from my personal account. The to field showed the journalist's email. The subject was regarding Mark Henderson and the Innovate Corpian contract. The body was cut off, showing only, Dear Ms. Jensen, I am a current employee at Momentum Media, and I have evidence of I saved the screenshot as draft do not send JPG and set it as my desktop background. When I logged off, my entire digital workspace was a stage, telling the story of an employee who had uncovered a massive crime and was one click away from exposing the CEO. He was the sole audience for my performance, and the curtain was about to fall. I walked into the office the next morning feeling a strange mix of terror and calm. All I could do was wait. I made coffee. I answered emails. On the outside, I was the same quiet analyst. On the inside, my heart was a drum solo. The silence broke at 10:17 a.m., an email from Mark. The subject, urgent. All employees were to join an emergency video conference in 5 minutes. This was it. I clicked the link. My screen filled with the confused faces of my colleagues. Then 2 new windows opened. One was Mark, his face pale and clammy, and in the other was the ghost himself, Mr. Henderson. A silent gasp rippled through the call. There he was, live, for the first time in years. But he wasn't the tyrant from his emails. The man on the screen was a wreck. His eyes were bloodshot, and his expensive suit was rumpled. He looked like a man who had spent the entire night wrestling with my demons. He cleared his throat. "Thank you all for joining," he began, his voice raspy. He couldn't look at the camera. After a great deal of personal reflection, I have decided that it is time for me to step back from my role as CEO of Momentum Media, effective immediately. He mumbled something about pursuing other interests, the classic excuses of the corporate damned. He had seen it all, the searches, the file name, the desktop background. He had almost certainly found the password and opened the zip file, his heart pounding, only to be met with that one beautiful word, gotcha. He didn't know what was real and what was fake. Did I have other evidence? Was the email to the journalist real? He couldn't take that chance. His own guilty conscience, likely littered with any number of real past sins, had convicted him. The trap didn't need real jaws. His paranoia was sharp enough. He had snooped his way right into his own resignation. Henderson's video feed blinked out, leaving a stunned silence. Mark stammered through the rest of the meeting, announcing an interim CEO. The office erupted into whispers. The following week was beautifully chaotic. The interim CEO, a no-nonsense woman named Diana, actually flew in. One of her first acts was to send a company-wide email announcing the immediate termination of the employee efficiency monitoring software. The email publicly apologized for the overzealous security measures and promised a new era of transparency and trust. It was a complete rejection of Henderson's entire reign. Mark wasn't fired. He was publicly demoted to special projects, which everyone knew was corporate purgatory. He never looked me in the eye again. He had to know it was me, but he could never prove it. My hands were perfectly clean. 2 weeks later, Diana called me into her office. She said the company needed stable, competent leadership. She offered me a promotion to director of analytics with a 40% pay raise. I didn't gloat. I just looked her in the eye and said, "Thank you. I accept." I never told a soul what I did. The secret was mine alone, the ultimate reward. The man who lived by invading secrets was brought down by one. He built his own cage, and I just quietly handed him the key. Justice isn't always loud. Sometimes it's a quiet click in an empty office, a carefully worded search term, and the sweet, satisfying silence of a tyrant falling on his own sword. He wanted to watch me, so I gave him the show of a lifetime. Now I want to hear from you. Have you ever faced a toxic manager? What's the most ridiculous thing a boss has ever done to you? Share your story in the comments below. I'd love to read them. And I promise, I'm not logging your data.